Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Monstrosities, a vlog of tokusatsu. I am your host, Matt Burkett. I'm hoping you are having a wonderful weekend. If you are stateside, happy July 4th weekend. Just be safe out there. Tonight, we get to do something really cool. As you guys know, I'm a big book guy. You know, if you cannot see the stuff back there and the stuff over there. And we always try to emphasize and really try to promote, works that you guys should pick up. Knowledge is so important within the realm of Godzilla, kaiju, tokusatsu, and all that stuff. And earlier this year, there was a really cool book that got released. And that, of course, was SF, the Japanese Science Fiction Film Encyclopedia, now available over on Amazon.com. This thing is almost like 500 pages worth of excellent kaiju, excellent tokusatsu knowledge. And wouldn't you know it, we actually have the author here today, and we're going to get to do a live interview. Now, as you guys know, we're also going to emphasize, if you have any questions and stuff, we always emphasize your participation. So please post it over in the comments. I'll highlight that. But until then, let me introduce the one, the only, Jules Carrozza. What is up, my friend?
Hey, dude.
How you doing?
I'm doing good. Yeah, I was just, finishing up some work and, doing like the usual routine,
No, trust me, especially in the past year and a half, routines have definitely become, a very common part of life. Man, I did a little, I read the Toho Kingdom interview with you. I was trying to do some background stuff. And in speaking of kind of like the past year and a half, I was wondering if you could kind of talk about how this thing came about, because you're a filmmaker by trade. Like you've written stuff before. You've written for America, you've written for Toho Kingdom. But like, I mean, dude, this is a feat. This is not just like maybe on my free time I'll just, dabble a little in writing, and then 500 pages later. How did SF come about?
So, as I told Nicholas on Toho Kingdom, with the lockdown and the pandemic and all that, like, I couldn't make movies for a while. So I didn't really have anything to really do. And also most of my work dried up at the time. You're a video editor as well, right?
Yes, I am actually.
Yeah, I do a lot of that sort of work. And, during the first few months of the pandemic, like that all just dried up. So like I didn't have anything to really do, except sit in my house and drink boxed wine. So I was like, I'm going to write a book, I'm going to write a book because like, it's either that, like I just needed like a project to like occupy my anxious mind at the time, because it was just a shit show. The first few months of the pandemic, and when the virus was like spreading in Italy, all I could think of was the film Virus by Kinji Fukasaku. I don't know if you've seen that movie.
I have yet to see it. I was actually, oddly enough, just reading about it in your book at lunch today, and I'm like, why have I not seen this movie?
Yeah, I highly recommend it. Probably of like, Fukasaku's crime films in general are like much better than like, most of his sci-fi films. But of all his sci-fi films, that's probably the best. And it's just like, moments of it like are just like, we lived through that basically, and so like that was very much on my mind at like the beginning of the pandemic, like what's going to happen with this virus. And I've been sort of keeping up with the vaccine research too, so I also thought a lot of Shin Godzilla as well,
right.
Because like that has the whole sort of trope of like the government mismanaging the crisis, while at the same time you have basically a group of like scientists and researchers are like racing against the clock to like defeat this adversary with science. And in the case of COVID, that was very much going on. So
yeah,
really like thinking a lot about those two films very much got me interested in like, writing that book,
No, totally. it's amazing how something like what we all kind of went through can be reflected in tokusatsu and the like.
Oh yeah.
Um, with you know, with the book, one of the things I really enjoy is you're not just concentrating on kaiju. It's not just a Godzilla book. It's not just a talking about Toho films. I mean, you go into like just all sorts of different things. Some films that I really enjoy that I'm glad that you brought up, like the Zeta movies. Like I'm a big Kaita Mamiya fan.
Oh yeah.
What made you decide to concentrate more so on kind of the 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 breadth of the genre as opposed to say just like, oh, I'm just going to write about Godzilla and that's it. Like, and the other thing I really enjoy too is that you also put a lot of historical context and societal context alongside uh, your discussions of the movies, which I think also kind of opens up a really interesting, window into, something that I think most average Westerners aren't going to know. But what made you decide to do that?
I mean, really, it's just sort of my interest in the films. Like, I'm a big history buff too.
Yeah.
So I was interested, those, especially the early, Showa Godzilla movies. I mean, they tie into history heavily. You're kind of like, to sort of tie them into the history of post-war Japan is like something I think is like kind of important to do, to sort of get like the best reading of them, like sort of in the context of the time. And that was something that I tried to do. So I did some historical research like around the movies a little too. So,
That's awesome.
Yeah. And as far as like, I just felt like, obviously, like as far as Godzilla books go, you have Steve's book, you have, David's book. I mean, the Godzilla movies themselves, like, have been written about so much
Right.
that obviously I wanted to delve into some films that had not been, talked about too much, especially things like, Mamoru Oshii's, like, Kerberos films, like
Right.
that, those sorts of films, like, there's some films that like Westerners are like almost completely unaware of, and then like they're just sort of starting to get their due, and I was kind of trying to like illuminate some of those films,
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, and again, I'm glad you did. And the guys that you brought up, like Colette and Rifle and Gotchesky, like they've pretty much had a handle on a lot of the Godzilla stuff. I do enjoy the fact that you dive into like Shin Godzilla in this one. It's not
Yeah.
one that's particularly always dived into a lot. Some people have, but the other thing I wanted to ask you, sorry, I just had to bring up my list here, is again, and you talked about it yourself, you're going into all of these obscure titles. What were the challenges of researching this? Because again, I mean, you're not just concentrating on the kaiju side of things. There's some films that, like you said, and I have to agree, things that I've never even heard of. Like you just went down this rabbit hole. Like what were the challenges of doing this? Because it just seems like a massive undertaking.
I mean, really, so one thing I did was I tried to delve into some Japanese sources that hadn't been touched before. Like one real rabbit hole that some Western fans are starting to like figure out and kind of take notice of, but like others aren't, is Japanese Wikipedia, which has like a lot of information that's not covered in like a lot of like the Western books. It's basically just information that's straight like from the ground in Japan, and I can read a little bit of Japanese, so like I can make a little more sense of the machine translations, and because I can understand some of the kanji. So I mostly did a lot of, I mean, actually, to research a little better, I learned a little bit more Japanese, you know,
Yeah.
you know, sort of better get like an understanding of like what I was reading. And yeah, so I just did a lot of delving into Japanese sources, and sometimes I would cross-reference them with Western sources too, which will often give you a good picture of things, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like it's sort of like you know, the Rashomon effect. Like if you kind of combine both stories, you get you often get something that's a little bit more probably closer to the truth, though not still. I'm still not completely the truth though, but you get like the closest view of the truth if you combine, you know, sources and cross-reference them. Yeah, so.
Absolutely. Were there any I mean, were you primarily just using Japanese Wikipedia, or were there like any Japanese books that you were just like, I absolutely need to like get a hold of this?
I mean, most of the information on Japanese Wikipedia is from Japanese books.
Fair
So, but I did use a lot of one area of like where there's a lot of undelved novel information is in the special features on a lot of the Japanese home video releases. You know,
Right.
there's a lot of information that's like not really. I mean, almost all the Godzilla movies. I think all the Godzilla movies, and then a lot of the straight up special effects films from Toho. You know, they all have commentary tracks, most of which have been untranslated. Haven't been translated yet. So well, one thing, I mean, for my next book, I'm trying to get like you know, some of those translated. But I listened to some of the commentary tracks that hadn't been translated yet, and I did sort of very rough translations of them. Yeah. But like, and I found out things like for like the flooding scenes and those like you know, panoramic sort of God's eye view shots and submersion of Japan. Nakano used beer. I found out like just like yeah, from like the commentary tracks, I found out like, you know, little things like that, you know. So that's something that I use, and just like even watching a lot of behind the scenes footage, like particularly of the films that Shinji Higuchi worked on, have extensive behind the scenes.
Oh yeah.
Documentation of them, and I watched like all of that and took extensive notes. So I feel like I got a pretty good portrayal of like how things kind of went down. And the good thing is a lot of that research is you know, going towards my next book as well. So
yeah, and the next book that you're talking about, if I'm not mistaken, is The Godfathers of Tokusatsu, is it not?
Yeah.
And we can touch upon that. There's still, I mean, other stuff obviously I want to talk about SF, but how's that coming? How's that different than SF? Because I've been seeing, you know, the stuff on your Facebook page, and it seems like, I mean, you're really like throwing everything at this. It sounds like you want like to like make a real like chronological English textbook about the history of Tokusatsu, which I don't think has really ever been done in like one big compilation. I could be wrong, but I mean, how's that coming along? Like, what are you hoping to do with that?
A lot of things. I mean, I'm probably going to go to England next year because they have, the BFI has the last surviving print of one of Eiji Tsuburaya's first films he ever worked on, Princess Kaguya.
Wow.
Yeah, the British Film Institute has like pretty much the last surviving print. It was believed to be lost, and then like the BFI found a print or something. And so I'm gonna probably after that book's published, though, I'm gonna go to England, and then I'll probably do like just like a patch, you know, in like a future edition. And it's just going to be an extensive like you know, chronology, particularly focusing on the filmmaking end of the tokusatsu medium, because that's something I'm particularly obsessed with. With SF, I had particular fun writing about that stuff, so I just figured I'll just do like a whole pretty much side book about that stuff,
Right.
which is becoming more of it's becoming like almost like the definitive book now.
Totally.
Like,
Absolutely.
So it's going to be somewhat similar in its format to Steve and Ed's Honda book, in that it'll just be a very like first-person kind of chronology of the whole thing, but it's going to follow pretty much everybody who is in like the tokusatsu industry. It tells the story of Tsuburaya, but it also tells the story of a lot of interesting people like Toru Matoba, or Keiji Kawakami, or Yoshiyuki Kuroda, or even like there's like a lot of tokusatsu directors who aren't really very well known in the West, and who did some pretty fantastic work. So
yeah,
Yajima, he's a big one. Yajima, he's like a huge. He was very influential on the tokusatsu scene in Japan.
Yeah.
And he's not really written about much in English. So yeah.
No, I really got to commend you for doing something like that, because there are a lot of, I don't want to say bit players, but I kind of feel like, we have this idea of like maybe 4 or 5 names on this one pedestal, and that's it. There's nobody else. There's no other story. Whereas, I mean, tokusatsu's history is as deep and as wild and crazy as anything in Hollywood's history.
Oh yeah,
maybe even more so in some cases.
I'd say so. I'd say like just as much, if not more so. And like it's like, yeah, it's a lot like how in Hollywood you have guys like Douglas Trumbull, or Dennis Muren. In the tokusatsu industry, there's like an extremely large cast of characters. It's quite an interesting story, and I'd like to cover it in a very in-depth way that's almost like never been attempted before, from like more of a filmmaker's perspective. Yeah, that's and like as someone who's made film, I think I can break the cinematic technique down a bit, and like sort of I'm almost like a little reverse engineering some of like what I'm seeing on screen a little bit.
Right.
With like the writing. Another big thing that is overlooked in the West is the war movies and how influential they were. I mean, they would like those films, the wartime propaganda that like pretty much was what made Tsuburaya famous in the first place, and then like a lot of films subsequent, a lot of the post-war films, they were a lot more successful financially than like the monster movies were. Like films like Storm Over the Pacific, or Attack Squadron, or I just watched a film that's not very well known from 1966 called Zero Fighter, and it was actually Yasuyuki Ue's first film he ever worked on as art director.
Oh, cool.
Zero Fighter from like mid 1966, and one format the next book will have is sort of this. You'll almost be like a kid in Japan, like seeing all these films kind of come out like that. That's sort of how I kind of pictured. That's the kind of reading experience I'm kind of trying to create. Is like almost trying to like an attempt to have the reader experience it in what feels like almost real time.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I love it. I love it. And we can include this with the Godfathers of Tokusatsu as well. But what if for you, just this is just kind of a fun question. What has been some of the more surprising things that has turned up in your research that surprised you personally? You know, whether you're talking about SF. I mean, obviously, I understand if you don't want to reveal anything that you got going on for Godfathers, but like, is there anything like any story tidbit piece of trivia that when you read this, you're just like, what, really? Like, what surprised you in your research?
I mean, a lot of stuff. I mean, there's sort of one sad story about like Akira Takarada. He actually, when he was a kid, he actually lived in Manchuria. He actually lived in Harbin, which is you know, close to where they had like Unit 731, you know,
Right.
and at the end of the war, like the Russians invaded, and you know, he and his family, like they, you know, had to flee quickly because
Yeah.
like you know, the Russians like basically found out what the Japanese did. They were pissed off, and Takarada was actually shot like, you know, during the retreat. So I never like knew that about him, you know, like
That's crazy.
yeah, and then my favorite story that I found out, which I haven't heard in any like English language story books, you know, is that basically, so after the war, I'm not sure if this was before or after Tsuburaya was dismissed from Toho, but he basically, Sadamasa Arakawa, who was just like a young fan at the time, he came to visit. Arakawa was obsessed with Tsuburaya because he had seen the war films. He'd seen the propaganda films like when he was younger, and they basically inspired him to, you know, sign up and become an aviator for the Japanese Imperial Army. He was like so, you know, moved by films like The War at Sea from Hawaii to Melee. And so he went to see Tsuburaya after the war at some point, and that's when the two kind of really hit it off. Like they shared like, you know, stories of aviation, and Tsuburaya told Arakawa, he said, we Japanese may never be able to fly Zeros again, but we will once more fly. And that's like, that's one of my favorite stories because it almost was like Tsuburaya kind of knew that like Japan would kind of heal itself again, and like you know, he it's like he kind of he almost like could see like the post-war recovery a little bit.
Oh
like,
yeah,
being like just like a very wise, you know, man, and like like that's like, you know, pretty much my favorite story, you know.
that's really cool. That's really cool. Yeah, it's always fun to uncover, you know, stuff like that, and it's neat to be able to present that, you know, again to the Western world kind of thing. So again, thank you for the research that you've been doing on this. Um, Another aspect of your book is that you actually had some contributions from some other writers. You got Kevin Derendorf of Mazer Patrol, and he's also written Kaiju for Hipsters. Great book. Love Kevin's work. John LeMay, another guy who we always talk about on here on Monstrosities. John writes a bajillion books a year, and they're all really good. And also a personal friend of mine, and he's going to actually be on here on Monday night, Patrick Galvin, who wrote a piece for you. I was going to ask you, like, how did their contributions come about, and you know, what can you just tell me a little bit about why you know asked for their input, I guess.
I mean, they're really just all like you know, good friends of mine, you know, who I trusted would, you know, make like really valuable contributions to the book, you know.
Right.
I mean, Kevin, he is just like, he has an encyclopedic knowledge of like the deepest cuts, you know.
Oh yeah.
He knows about things that even I haven't heard of, you know. So, yeah. Like, and he's aware of like direct to video releases from like Korea that like I have never heard of in my life. So I'm always impressed just by the breadth of his knowledge of the deep cuts, you know.
Totally.
And then Patrick is just like a really intelligent, film scholar type who just like he's I may ask him to write something for my next book too. I'm going to have a bunch of contributors for my next book as well. Like we'll talk about that kind of like later, but like there'll be some sidebars, in my next book about like basically showing you how to do like DIY tokusatsu filmmaking techniques, Yeah.
How to blow up your house, that kind of thing.
Yeah. In fact, there will be a article about the pyrotechnic aspect, which I'm pretty much just going to put like redacted over like every other word, because like you can get in some trouble for that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I was so I'm just gonna like put like over all the important information. I'm just gonna put redacted, But but kids, you can find out about it if you download a little thing called Tor. So yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
I had mentioned before that one of the and this is more of kind of a fun general question, and maybe some people in the chat might find this interesting, but like again, one of the things I really appreciate about again, chat SF, Japanese Science Fiction Film Encyclopedia, available now on Amazon, go buy it, is that you reference a lot of different movies that some people might have heard of, lesser known stuff. But I was curious, what are some of your favorite films or even TV series just to recommend to people, you know what I mean, that you might really enjoy that might not be so well known? I always love, learning about stuff like that, the unsung films that are actually good, the diamonds and stuff kind of thing. But what are some of your favorites to recommend?
I mean, aside from Virus, which I mean, nowadays I think everyone should watch that film. Like Kahachi Okamoto's Blue Christmas or Blood Type Blue is actually extremely good. It's sort of like a Japanese John Frankenheimer film. There's also Mamoru Oshii's Kerberos films, which are sort of a trilogy. The first two are live action, and then the third one is Jinro, which is a lot better known. And it's an anime. And then let me think of. There's just like so many amazing, and I'd love to see the war films in particular get a little more love, because those are like big parts of tokusatsu history. Particularly, probably my favorite of all the Toho war films. There's Kahachi Okamoto's Japan's Longest Day, which is just an incredible film. And it's almost a film that I kind of was thinking about, like, on like January 6th, when all that
all the craziness,
the chaos took place. Yeah, that's all I'll say about it. But that film was sort of on my mind that day. And then there's just like a lot of good films. I'd like to see the films of Toshio Masuda get a lot more love too. He was a very distinctive and pretty talented director. He made Prophecies of Nostradamus, which is of course a fabulous film. I love the movie. But he also made the Human Revolution films, which were sort of controversial at the time because the it's about the founder of I think the Soka Gakkai sect of Buddhism, which is sort of controversial in Japan because it's considered a cult by some. So like that film was sort of seen as glorifying like a cult leader. So like Toho had it under suppression for like a while, but they ended up like re-releasing it in a 4K remastered recently.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and those are both interesting films, the two Human Revolution films. They star Tetsuro Tamba as well, and he directed a lot of anime as well. He was actually a pretty big part of the Space Battleship Yamato franchise.
Oh, that's really neat.
Yeah, and another gem that I don't hear people talk that much about is Hideaki Anno's live-action adaptation of Cutie Honey, which is like really good. Yeah,
I've actually not seen that. What year did that come out?
2004.
Okay.
Yeah, it actually has. It has Mikako Ichikawa, who's in Shin Godzilla.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's in it, and it just actually feels like a ridiculous anime, made with real people. It's like amazingly like ridiculous,
Yeah, yeah, totally,
Yeah.
totally. No, that's really cool. I'll do when this concludes, I'll go back and write all those down and check them out. My tokusatsu viewing as of late hasn't been so much because I just haven't had the time, but those are definitely some good recommendations. Something that this is kind of like taking a bit of a beeline, but it's a topic that personally I feel is kind of important. I would love to get your input on it, and it could just be from my perspective. I feel like modern day today, tokusatsu, kaiju, whatever, like good information, we're kind of at this point of where we could either lose a lot of good people who like try to like do this stuff and lose it to how can I like verbalize this, uh lose it to companies and stuff who are putting people at the forefront that really don't know what they're talking about, whether we're talking about certain Blu-ray features on a certain popular 2016 movie that Funimation put out, or if we're talking about tokusatsu when they put out a certain YouTuber on a platform and the guy had no idea about Ultraman or anything like that. Even articles in Fangoria as early as like 2019 off the top of my head, current YouTube, that kind of thing. Like not everything needs to be like this hard driven research backed thing, but there does seem to be a bit of a there's way more of that than there is of like the actual good stuff, in my perspective. But I wanted to get your take on it. Do you think that when I say we're just talking about Western fandom, is in danger of losing like good research stuff? I mean, we got guys like you, we got guys like LeMay and Darendorf and stuff, but is that going to be enough in your opinion?
So I've been seeing like a bit of both. I've been seeing some fans who are kind of uninformed about it, but the majority of the uninformed fans that I meet are often pretty fascinated to hear all the interesting stories and like all the research. I've been tweeting out like a lot of my research as of late, and I'm finding a surprisingly big audience for it. I mean, I am a little bothered by like the soundbite kind of YouTube kind of thing with as far as that's concerned, but I'm also seeing a level of scholarship that's really sort of the best it's ever been, because we actually have access to better information than before. I mean, back in the old days, and even I was alive, back then, like in the 90s, even you had to import VHS tapes unsubtitled from Japan to see films, even like Submersion of Japan or like any of the more obscure films. You basically had to watch them without subtitles, from, like on a VHS tape. So it was a lot harder to do research back then. It was actually much more expensive, and so like you have to respect guys like Steve, or like David, or Stuart Galbraith, for the fact that they actually went to Japan and like interviewed people and like had the interviews translated. Whereas basically like the millennial historians, they all you really have to do is kind of get like on like Japanese Wikipedia, and you'll start to see things that haven't really been talked about in English. So it's like easier to do that kind of research now, like but at the same time there's also like a better kind of quality of information, because like we're getting stuff straight from Japan like in seconds now because of the internet, Right. So I think it's changed. No, overall, I mean, really, period. It's funny. I was just writing an article, like because I do some copywriting work professionally, and like I was kind of just like writing an article about like the importance of information and like data, kind of like moving forward post COVID, like as far as like tokusatsu information goes, like that's sort of the same thing. Like on the one hand, we do have to be careful of like the soundbitey kind of thing, but we also have to, but we also have access to really the best information we've ever had. So, but like at the same time, one thing I am going to do for my next book is do a scour of like all the Japanese newspapers in English that I can find. Yeah, because you can find like amazing nuggets of information, doing like that sort of research,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I hope you're right. I hope you're right. I think I might be a little bit, slanted on the negative side of things, but like I said, there's guys like you, guys like the other people you've mentioned before, preserving this stuff for the future and keeping it good and free of assumption and opinion and just kind of fact based is like a passion of mine. So I'm glad that you're fighting the good fight in that regard. Speaking of all of these additional authors and such, I know that we're here, pimping out your book, which, by the way, chat, SF, the Japanese Science Fiction Film Encyclopedia, available on Amazon. Go pick it up. 500 pages worth of goodness, worth the money. Super cheap, too. Not cheap in info, cheap in price. Are there other works that you would recommend people to check out? And it doesn't have to necessarily be like tokusatsu slanted. It could be like just based on Japanese film and that kind of thing. We have a lot of people who are interested in that. But are there any works that you tend to recommend people to check out?
I mean, so like when I was younger, one of my favorite books was, and I think it's still available as an ebook. Yeah, it actually is available as an ebook because I like, purchased the ebook, for it is Galbraith's Monsters Are Attacking Tokyo I mean, it wasn't like an amazing book for the time. Like I remember I was about 11 years old when it came out, and like I grabbed it off the shelf and I just was like, whoa.
I'm trying to find it. That's why I was leaning back here. And now I'm like looking at my shelf. I'm like, where the hell did it go?
Yeah, it's a really good. It just really tells it from like a firsthand perspective. The interviews in it are fabulous.
There we go.
Yeah, it's like the first it's like one of the first like very like in-depth like portrayals of like what the Japanese film industry was like back then.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like when I was reading those interviews, like as a kid, I got like a very like sort of straight up like view of like you know, what like the Japanese film industry was you know, you know, back in the 60s, you know, and that's something I'm trying to do. That was an influence on my book, like on my next book, like just this whole like idea of kind of like helping like the reader to sort of experience it in like real time, you know. And I think Monsters was like one of the first books to really do that. So, and then I also like, I'm also quite fond of Patrick Macias's Tokyo Scope, the Japanese cult film companion.
Another good one, yeah.
I just wish it was like 3 times longer, because like Patrick's writing is like so good, you know.
Yeah.
It was a bit of an influence on SF actually, just like sort of because like a common criticism that I hear of SF is like that that like some films get really long, in-depth reviews, and others just get like capsule reviews. And I mean, the real reason I did that was because if I were to write a book covering every Japanese science fiction film in like a 10-page review, it would be like probably like 1,500 pages long, which would be awesome. I mean,
Yeah.
a 1,500-page Japanese science fiction film encyclopedia would be awesome, but probably would have taken me 4 years to write instead of 1. So,
Right.
you know, that's sort of that's sort of I think like if you want to like get into like Japanese cult films, Tokyo Scope is like just a really great like field guide to like sort of understand what the best of like every sort of subgenre is. And there's even like a big section on
sorry, I'm grabbing it.
tokusatsu.
Show to the kiddies at home.
Yeah, there's like a whole chapter of on Kinji Fukasaku, and like and a really good in-depth interview with him, who's always been a figure that's very much fascinated me, like in like post-war Japanese studio films, you know, because he made a very interesting subgenre of like crime films that are just like amazing. Like you'll see like a Yakuza like walk onto the screen in like aviator shades with like a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, and then like at the bottom of the screen there'll be the kanji of the guy's name, you know.
Yeah,
that's like a common you know, sort of like Fukasaku trademark, you know.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
Yeah.
My boy Raph Enchima says, awesome job with the book, Carrozza. Isabella says, Carrozza, your book is great. And Jim says, good stuff here. Glad I made it. So we appreciate you guys coming in here. Yeah, no, those books that you mentioned, like especially Tokyo Scope, is really cool. One of the very few books off the top of my head that actually maybe the only one that talks about Dark Soldier D, which was like a little mini series thing that was like in the early 2000s. I friggin' love that thing. But like Macy's book was the only one to ever cover it, that even had just had like a little sliver of more info than what you could find on the back of the DVD covers. So I highly recommend that to everybody. So we got about 15 minutes left in here, but I wanted to just ask you, did you want to talk about a little bit about your filming background, or we could talk about, we can try to fit both in for sure.
Yeah.
But also talk about the other books that you have coming out, because you have, SF2, you got, Godfathers, obviously we covered that a little bit, but what would like? I know it's might be a little weird, but what would you like to cover?
I mean, we could talk. I'll talk a little about my filmmaking background, like as I talk about Godfathers, because it very much ties in, you know.
Okay.
I mean, as far as SF2 goes, it might be a few years until that comes out, but it is, you know, very much still on the roster. I'm also planning to write the first book ever exclusively focused on the Evangelion franchise.
Oh, nice.
I'm gonna write just an entire like Evangelion encyclopedia, like pretty much that's kind of half a biography of Hideaki Anno and like half just a critical dissection of like every episode in film. So
I know numerous people who would be very interested to get their paws on that one.
Yeah, I think that's a book the world you know, kind of needs. So I'm gonna probably after SF2, that book's kind of on the roster as well. But as far as Godfathers goes, like as I said, that film is very much a passion project that kind of comes out of my sort of experience, you know, like as a filmmaker, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you sort of work in the industry as well, and you know, a big tenet of the industry is like connections. You know.
Oh,
like,
it's not. It's like 95%. Yeah. It's talent only takes you so far. You got to have those connections, otherwise you got nothing.
Yeah. It's the lifeblood, and that's very much what my next book is kind of about. Godfathers of Tokusatsu, because once you do enough kind of cross-referencing of like everyone who worked on like each film, you start to figure out the sort of connections that the men sort of made with each other, and like Tsuburaya, he just like mentored a ridiculous amount of people. And even he had a mentor. Really, you can actually trace pretty much the career of Yoshiro Edamasa, who was you know, Tsuburaya's mentor. You can trace him directly to people like Daisuke Sato, like Hiroto Yokokawa. You know, you can like because like Tsuburaya mentored like you know, so many people, and then like Nakano and Kawakita, they mentored Higuchi, you know. And Higuchi's been like you know, mentoring an entire like generation of Tokusatsu people. I was a little bit inspired to write the book also by having met Higuchi at G-Fest. Like when I met him, I paid extra for that, you know, reception, because I just like had to like, you know, have like a chat with him, you know. And he was immediately like, Nostromo, you know, drip, 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 alien. You know, he, we like immediately began to like, you know, talk about Alien. Like he hadn't seen Alien Covenant, which had like just come out at the time because it like wasn't out in Japan. But I sort of told him it was like kind of a cool looking movie without a good script, you know.
Right.
And he at the end of like our conversation, he showed me pictures from the production of Prophecies of Nostradamus on his phone that I'd like never seen before.
Wow.
Yeah. He was extremely impressed that I like knew about, you know, that film. Yeah. He told me, and you know, since this has been kind of corroborated since, like Western fans thought that Toru Narita designed the soft-bodied humans at the end of the movie, who were actually played by like, you know, kids, which is pretty disturbing. They're sort of meant to be like post-nuke children.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a creepy. It makes me you know, think of like the movie Threads a little bit, you know, which is a film I either highly recommend or don't, you know. You know, that's a messed up movie, but
Right.
he told me that Akihiko Iguchi actually designed them. And he's the guy who designed Mechagodzilla and Titanosaurus. So, and
Wow.
that has since been kind of like proven to be true.
That's really cool.
Yeah. And Godfather is as I said, it's like a sort of chronology of the tokusatsu industry, almost from the perspective of like Japanese kid, like seeing all these cool films and TV shows come out.
Totally.
Yeah.
That's
And it's going to go deep into the filmmaking too, which is just something that I'm like obsessed with. Is like how they did everything.
It's amazing to me that there's not more kind of celebration of that style of filmmaking, especially out here in the West, considering where so many of these guys got their roots from. When I say they, I'm talking about the big filmmakers of today. It's just kind of like seen as like, oh, it's cheesy, oh, it's fake, but I mean, I don't think you're going to find a better kind of environment of independent filmmaking, if that makes any sense. You know what I mean?
Agreed. Yeah.
We have a disparaging comment right here. When you buy Jules's book, make sure you start by reading the guest essay about the early color films in Japan. Some guy whose initials are PG.
I gotta read that article.
What's up, Patrick?
It's a really good article. But yeah, as I was saying on Twitter, like, do you know what the Kuleshov effect is?
No, not at the top of my head.
So that is an effect. I believe the guy who developed it was named Kuleshov. It was actually used heavily by Sergei Eisenstein,
Okay.
and it's just the concept of like editing in an entirely visual sort of way. So like you're like, if something's done with the Kuleshov effect, you really just sort of see the pictures. You see like the series of pictures, and you kind of can realize just by looking at them they're connected.
Oh yeah, like you're talking about like that it shows the picture of a man, then it shows a picture of like a piece of bread or something, or it shows a picture of a man and then a girl swinging on the swing or something like that.
Yep.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about now.
And it pretty much was first really introduced with the Odessa Steps scene in Battleship Potemkin. And the truth is, I mean, tokusatsu uses like that kind of entirely visual storytelling technique very, very well. And that's like a big sort of thesis of my book, that like these guys like Tsuburaya or Teruyoshi Nakano, Koichi Kawakiri, Yoshiki Kuroda, like they all had this sort of talent for like this visual sort of storytelling. That's a lot like the silent filmmakers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that's a big thesis of my book, and then also like I'm trying to sort of dispel the idea that like tokusatsu is like this kind of cheap, like sort of chintzy filmmaking technique. It's actually, I mean, in Japan, it seemed very much like the work of Jim Henson is here.
Yes. Yeah, as it should be. I mean, there's
Yes.
some seriously incredible things that can't come out of that.
Yeah.
And if people actually knew how elaborate those effects can get, I think that they would, be singing a different tune.
Yeah, and it's not totally like the Japanese sensibility is a bit different, and they sort of, there's more of a valuing of like visual beauty over like realism, plus as far as like the miniature effects go, one big aspect of it that's not talked a lot about, that's not talked about a lot by Westerners, is Tsuburaya was an aviator. Like
Yeah.
he was utterly obsessed with aviation. So his early miniature work very much kind of came out of that. Like him being like up in the planes and seeing everything like miniaturized. That very much fueled his obsession with miniature photography. Was his aviation career. So that's like something. Yeah, I'm kind of trying to put like all these interesting contexts into it that haven't really been seen in the sort of in like that kind of lens, and also the kohai senpai sort of social dynamic in Japan. I'm not sure if you're too familiar with that.
No.
All right, so in Japan, in professional situations, particularly on film sets, you have the older, the older, more experienced man. He's the kohai, and he'll take the senpai like under his wing and sort of like mentor him and kind of teach him the ropes. And you can very much see this relationship in like a lot of the tokusatsu guys. And how they kind of mentored and like trained each other. Like Higuchi was very much the kohai of like Nakano and Kawakita.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. No, that's all. I can't wait to read this book. It's gonna be good stuff. Of course, we don't have to cut this short if I interrupted you.
What's that?
But I wanted to ask you, make your elevator pitch to the audience right now as to why people should be buying SF, the Japanese Science Fiction Encyclopedia, which, by the way, is on Amazon for like $25. Go buy it. But why should people buy it?
So I think I just tried to write a very fresh, interesting sort of look at the genre. I mean, like, while I was writing it, science fiction was heavily on my mind because the pandemic was like raging, and I feel like it has a perspective to it that's very sort of unique, and because like the whole thing with a big part of the Japanese science fiction, even the tokusatsu genre, is like it's very much a reflection on Japan's sort of disaster-prone status. Like the fact that this is something that a lot of Westerners I will sort of never understand. Like, if you're in Tokyo, like any day now, an earthquake could kill you. Like that's sort of how that's like what it's like to live in a heavily disaster-prone country. Like,
yeah,
you don't know like when the next natural disaster will take place. It could be any day, and the films very much reflect that sort of sentiment. That was very much sort of what I was trying to kind of convey through SF,
Mm-hmm.
and also talk about some other sort of aspects of these films as well.
It's one of the things I enjoy about it, because you do put a lot of cultural and historical context behind a lot of it, and it really is fascinating. Again, guys, the book, if you haven't seen it for the umpteenth time, I'm gonna go full screen here, because you need to buy this book. Okay, it is good stuff, and you'll make Jules happy if you buy it, and you'll make me happy if you buy it, because we need more good knowledge like this actually celebrated and thrown out there within the fandom. Before I ask you if there's anything else you would like to plug, as far as social media goes, or Patreon or anything like that, is there anything else you would like to talk about before we wrap this up?
Well, I'd only like to mention that SF has been given like a big patch about a month ago, so it's been improved pretty substantially. The reviews have been like reorganized a bit, so they have more of kind of an organized format to them now, and there's a little bit of new content too. So it's the second pressing is like. I tried to address some of the criticisms of the first pressing with the second one. So it's I think it's a substantially improved, like sort of version of the book. So that's really,
So what you're telling me is I'm gonna have to go buy a second copy. It's not enough that John LeMay does that with like all his books. Now I got to do it for this one too. But again, totally worth it. I can't wait to read that. Where can people follow you on social? Like, what are some things that people can go on?
What'd you say?
What are some things that people can follow you on social? Like if you're on Twitter, like can they support you on Patreon? Do you want to plug some of that?
Oh yeah, so I have a Twitter, and I also have a Patreon as well, which is sort of to help with some of the expenses with the upcoming book, because the main two expenses for the next book are that I want to import some extremely rare films from Japan, and that can get a little costly sometimes. And also, the most costly thing is I need to do like a lot of translations of some materials, and that's I'd like to get maybe about 12 Toho commentary tracks translated to really add like some novel information to the next
Absolutely.
book. I'd ask for the England trip to be paid for, but I know that's a tall order. But yeah, I'm going to go to England, next year to see the print of Princess Kaguya as well, because that just seems like such an essential part of like tokusatsu history. It was actually one of the first Japanese films to ever use miniatures. So it's a pretty important film, and I was pretty shocked to find out that it actually is not lost. It actually still exists. So
no, it's great that the BFI has kept it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's really astounding, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, and I also have I have a YouTube channel as well with a few of my pretty disturbing short films on it. Yeah. I make I guess sort of like Shinya Tsukamoto, like how actually he's heavily influenced by tokusatsu films. I draw I kind of make a little bit of my own twisted version of it,
Well, I mean, you even have the Toho logo open up fungus.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to make a second edit of it that won't use the Toho logo. Like that was just for like the YouTube version, but like yeah, it was very like that was heavily influenced by like a lot of Japanese horror and sci-fi films.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, probably the biggest influence came from John Wyndham's novel, The Day of the Triffids. That
I have not read the book or seen the movie, and I feel like I'm missing out.
Yeah, I think the movie's on Amazon Prime, so it's pretty easy to see, and it's not a very good adaptation of the novel, but it's like a decent like sort of like British monster movie.
Totally.
And it has some good apocalyptic sequences, so that's I would actually recommend like the 1962 film a bit. Yeah,
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah,
it sounds really freaking cool. Jules, thank you so much for coming on here, and thank you for spending an hour with us talking about all this stuff. I really appreciate it. And guys, go all the stuff that he talked to you about. I think right down here in the information of this video, you should be able to find him on Twitter. It has his YouTube link, has his Patreon link. If you guys want to support him to get this stuff out, I mean, again, we're always talking about the sanctity of information and the importance of good information. And this is a cause that is worth supporting for sure. But all that stuff should be down below, including we were talking about fungus. There's a link there too. And yeah, man, like I said, I'm sorry I just keep on saying it, but thank you so much for taking the time to talk about this. This really is a great book, and it really does deserve all the support it can get. And now you're going to be getting more of my money because now I got to go buy the second printing of it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Anytime. Chat, thank you again for coming in, and we will be back here on Monday night for an episode of Take 3 with Patrick Galvin, who's actually in the or was in the chat a little bit earlier, and that should be a lot of fun. But until then, for everyone who's out here in the States, happy 4th of July tomorrow, happy Independence Day, be safe, take care of your pets. Loud noises scare my puppy a lot, so it's gonna be all staying inside and not so much fun outside tomorrow night. But and again, Jules, thank you again, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, guys, have yourself a great night, and we will see you in a couple days.